Coming up on this Thursday edition of Newsline at noon, opposition lawmakers have begun street protests accusing the ruling party of blocking the investigation into alleged election meddling by the nation's spy agency. The ruling party says the opposition is holding the investigation back. In a renewed fight against corruption, prosecutors summoned former tax agency chief Jeon Gun-pyo, suspected of accepting bribes from CJ Group in return for helping the conglomerate avoid a tax evasion probe. Plus, describing growth in the first half as modest, the U.S. Federal Reserve says it will continue its bond buying program. The U.S. economy grew faster than expected in the second quarter, but growth in the first was revised down. These stories and more on Newsline at noon.
Where's the best place for bibimbap?
Les Jeux Olympiques d'hiver se dérouleront-ils à Pyeongchang?
هل أنتم حقاً سابع أكبر مصدر في العالم؟
この歌手は誰ですか？你好，最近哪部电视剧的人气最旺？
Korea is attracting interest from around the world. The more you know, the more you want to know. Dynamic Korea.
Thanks for joining us. You're watching Newsline at noon. I'm Choi Yu-sun in Seoul.
Good to have you with us. I'm Mark Broom. We kick things off with the latest bone of contention between the nation's two main rival political parties. Both sides have failed to confirm the list of witnesses for the ongoing parliamentary probe into the spy agency's alleged interference in last year's presidential election.
The scandal has rattled the nation, and the opposition Democratic Party is currently holding a public demonstration in protest against what it sees as inaction by the other side. Kim Young-gil has our top story.
The rival parties are still wrangling over who will be on the witness list for the special parliamentary probe into whether the nation's spy agency meddled in last year's presidential election. The main opposition Democratic Party wants guarantees that former leaders of the National Intelligence Service and National Police Agency will appear for questioning. The ruling Henry Party agrees they should be questioned, but does not think the guarantees are necessary. To protest the ruling party's position, the Democratic Party says it is holding a public demonstration at Seoul Plaza in front of City Hall. The Democratic Party leader said Wednesday he is running out of patience.
The ruling Henry Party shows no will to reform the National Intelligence Service. We cannot tolerate the situation anymore. The Democratic Party will take action with the public to restore democracy and reform the NIS.
Thus, Henry Party says the Democratic Party just wants to delay the parliamentary investigation into the NIS scandal.
The Democratic Party is trying to break up the parliamentary probe. This is a suicidal act by the main opposition party.
The National Assembly is looking into whether the spy agency interfered in last year's presidential election by posting comments favoring this Henry Party candidate. Meanwhile, the investigation has also been stalled by bickering between the rival parties over who will represent the parties on the parliamentary committee charged with conducting the probe, and whether a briefing by spy agency officials should be open to the public. The briefing is scheduled to start on August 5th. Kim Young-gil, Arirang News.
A former chief of the National Tax Agency appeared before prosecutors this morning for questioning over allegations that he took bribes from CJ Group in exchange for favors during a tax audit into the food and entertainment giant in 2006. Our Kim Min-ji has more.
In an ongoing fight against corruption, state prosecutors summoned former tax office chief Jeon Gun-pyo on Thursday for allegedly taking bribes. Jeon is accused of receiving $300,000 and luxury watches from CJ Group in 2006 after he was named the head of the National Tax Service. Prosecutors said Jeon's deputy Ha Byung-ik admitted passing on a bribe from CJ Group to Jeon. Ha, who became the tax office chief later, was arrested on Saturday and admitted to taking the money and gifts, but claimed that he handed them to Jeon. John has denied the allegations. Meanwhile, recent investigations have revealed that many irregularities involving the tax office. Local reports say that the office was supposed to collect 1.85 trillion won, more than it did between 2009 and March this year, raising suspicions of corruption within the agency. The cabinet, underscoring the importance of stamping out corruption among civil servants, passed a bill toughening penalties on government officials who take bribes. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
Korea's consumer prices remained well below the central bank's inflation target band last month, but there are growing concerns about the inflation rate in the second half of the year. The main risks are currency fluctuations and the rising prices of agricultural products. Our Hwang Jie has the details.
Korea's consumer prices grew at its fastest pace in 5 months in July, but was still in the 1% range for the 9th straight month. Statistics Korea said Thursday that the nation's inflation gained 1.4% last month from the same period a year earlier after rising 1% in June. The consumer inflation rate in July remains well below the central bank's inflation target band of 2.5% to 3.5% this year. The pressure of rising prices, however, will increase in the second half of the year. The central bank said in its recent report that it expects inflation to grow 2.1% in the second half from the previous year, accelerating from an estimated 1.3% in the first half. The bank cautioned against possible price hikes of domestic agricultural products due to weather conditions and the U.S. Federal Reserve's planned stimulus tapering, which could weaken the Korean won. A depreciating Korean won will cause price hikes of imports like crude oil and raw materials. In fact, Korea's consumer prices rose nearly 5% in 2008 as the won-dollar exchange rate soared. Hwang Jie, Arirang News.
Business as usual on the nation's trade front as Korea posted a trade surplus for the 18th consecutive month in July. The Ministry of Trade, Industry and Energy said Thursday that Korea logged exports of $45.8 billion last month, up 2.6% from a year earlier. IT, mobile devices and semiconductors led the growth, all expanding more than 20% on year. But the overall trade surplus shrank from the previous month to $2.7 billion as imports grew at a faster rate than exports. Inbound shipments reached $43.1 billion, rising 2.7% from the same month last year. The U.S. Federal Reserve has decided to keep its stimulus program in place for the time being, offering no clarification on when it will begin winding it down. But with growth widely expected to pick up in the latter half of the year, economists say a tapering off of the stimulus may not be that far away. Our Yulian reports.
The U.S. Fed has given no indication that it is planning to reduce its bond buying in coming months, saying only the economy is still in need of support, although it continues to recover.
More generally, with the recovery still proceeding at only a moderate pace, the economy remains vulnerable to unanticipated shocks, including the possibility that global economic growth may be slower than currently anticipated.
In the statement following the two-day meeting on Wednesday, the central bank cited some unconvincing economic indicators for keeping the stimulus in place for the time being. It downgraded the pace of recovery in the first half of the year to modest from moderate and pointed to low inflation that's been hovering just over 1%. Policymakers see low inflation as a risk to economic performance. The Fed also took note of the rise in mortgage rates, which could dampen growth in the housing market. Despite the Fed's dovish stance, economists say it may start dialing back its stimulus in September, as expected by many. Earlier on Wednesday, the government announced that the economy grew 1.7% in the second quarter of this year. That's up from 1.1% from the previous quarter and much better than many economists had expected. Looking forward, the Fed says it expects economic growth will pick up from its recent pace. Since last December, the Fed has been buying $85 billion in Treasury bonds and mortgage-backed securities a month. Back in June, Fed Chairman Ben Bernanke said it will start paring back the monthly purchases later this year and rid of them completely by mid-2014, as long as the economy shows solid growth. Yurian, Arirang News.
There is a new U.S. National Security Agency surveillance program that grants access to nearly everything a user does on the internet without prior authorization. That's according to documents revealed by exiled U.S. whistleblower Edward Snowden. The program, called the X Key Score, collects vast amounts of information from emails, online chats, and the browsing histories of millions of individuals across the globe. X Key Score, the documents say, is the agency's widest-reaching system for developing intelligence from computer networks. The NSA has strongly denied allegations of widespread unchecked access to information online, saying X Key Score is a legal intelligence-gathering program designed to protect the US and its allies.
For your fill of Korean and international news, join Chae Yu-sun and Mark Broom every weekday at lunchtime. Newsline at noon.
Plenary session this Wednesday and vote on the government restructuring bills.
In response to growing unrest in the country after former President Mohamed Morsi was ousted, Egypt's interim government has ordered the police to immediately end all sit-in protests by Morsi's supporters, setting up potentially bloody shutdown. Our Connie Lee reports.
Supporters of ousted Egyptian President Mohamed Morsi defied orders and remained on the streets Wednesday, holding night prayers in Cairo, hours after Egypt's interim government ordered an end to all protests. In a televised statement, an official from the interim government said the sit-in protests and vigils in Cairo were a threat to Egypt's national security.
The cabinet has decided to take all means necessary to face these dangers and put an end to it.
The interim government even called on the police to end the protests, which have been continuing since the army removed Morsi from office in early July. Still, Muslim Brotherhood supporters say they are not discouraged and continue to call for the reinstatement of Morsi, despite the serious threat of violence.
The attempts to threaten and terrorize those participating in the sit-in continue. But I want to reaffirm that the numbers of those taking part are increasing.
We pay no attention to the statements of the Interior Minister or Foreign Minister, and we don't care whether America is with us or against us, or Europe for that matter.
The cabinet's latest order came a day after U.S. President Barack Obama asked Republican senators to go to Egypt and assess the situation there with military leaders and the opposition. This also comes after EU's foreign policy chief met with Morsi to talk about the current situation. Meanwhile, government officials in Egypt also announced that they will prosecute several Muslim Brotherhood leaders on charges of inciting the violence. Connie Lee, Arirang News.
The Syrian government has given the United Nations the green light to inspect three sites where chemical weapons have allegedly been used. The UN Secretary General's office says the inspection team will be dispatched to Syria as soon as possible. One of the sites under investigation is Khan al-Assal, outside the northern city of Aleppo. Both the government and the rebels blame each other for the March attack that killed almost 30 people. The other two sites, while not named by the UN, are believed to be Damascus and Homs.
Japan's minor Social Democratic Party has strongly criticized Deputy Prime Minister Taro Aso's recent reference to the Nazi regime and called on him to give up his parliamentary seat. According to Kyodo News Agency, the party also urged Aso to retract his remarks, including a comparison of Japan's constitutional revision to the Nazi era. Earlier, Chief Cabinet Secretary Yoshihide Suga said the Deputy Prime Minister should explain why he made the comments that have sparked anger in neighbouring countries, including South Korea. During a lecture on Monday, Aso suggested Japan study how Germany's Weimar Constitution was transformed into the Nazi regime, stressing Tokyo's constitutional revision should be done discreetly. China and Japan have been locked in a territorial dispute over a group of islands in the East China Sea since late last year. Rhetoric from both sides has gotten quite heated, but Tokyo could be softening its stance as it has approached Beijing for talks on the issue. Hwang Sang-yi reports.
China is raising the stakes in its territorial tussle with Japan, but Tokyo seems to be taking a step back. Last month, Chinese warships made a circuit of the Japanese archipelago, passing the Tsushima Strait and Hokkaido to reach waters between Okinawa and Guam. Shortly after, Beijing also flew a military plane through international airspace between the disputed East China Sea islands and Okinawa Prefecture's main island. Since last September, the two countries have been bickering over a group of islands in the East China Sea, known as Senkaku in Japan and Diaoyu in China. Beijing says it has a historical claim to the islands, while Tokyo has controlled them for decades. In an effort to shore up support in the dispute against China, Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe left for a three-nation ASEAN tour, but he appeared to show a sudden change in heart upon his arrival this week.
We hope to hold unconditional frank dialogue between the foreign ministers and leaders.
Japan's Vice Foreign Minister Saiki Akitaka repeated Abe's stance following his two-day visit to China earlier this week.
We exchanged views on a broad range of issues, frankly, and in a serious manner, and we agreed to keep in touch through various channels.
China's foreign ministry said Beijing made its positions clear on the issues the two nations face. Despite its apparent offer of an olive branch, experts say it will be hard for Japan to mend ties with China without clarifying its stance over the disputed islands. Hwang Sang-yi, Arirang News.
Samsung or Apple? It's become a staple question among tech fans in recent years, with many consumers fiercely loyal to their favourite. Those on the Samsung side of the fence will have room to cheer now, though, as a recent consumer satisfaction survey has shown more people like Samsung's smartphones over Apple's iPhone. Samsung's Galaxy S3 and Galaxy Note 2 topped the American Customer Satisfaction Index with 84 points each out of 100. They beat out three iPhones, the iPhone 5, the iPhone 4S and the iPhone 4. The survey revealed consumers like the Samsung phones for their larger screen size and price. The study of the 10 most popular smartphones was the first of its kind.
Korean golfer and the LPGA's #1 ranked player Park In-bi may be close to becoming the world's first golfer to win 4 major events in a single season. Park, who already won 3 majors this year, hopes to taste victory for the 4th time at this week's British Open in St Andrews, Scotland. The 4-day tournament begins at 2:30 p.m. today, Korea time, and the Korean star golfer is scheduled to tee off at just past 3 p.m. On Wednesday, Park practiced on the very difficult course, and even though there was a media award following her round, she took the spotlight in stride.
You know, my emotions doesn't express so much on my face. Yeah, that's just how I've played golf, and it's been working, really good on the golf course. So I think I found myself, I figured that it was gonna be, very good on the golf course. So that's.
Another Korean golfer and 2-time British Open winner Shin Ji-ae is one of a total of 21 Korean golfers taking part. Whoever comes out the winner will take home a check for $2.75 million. The mercury in parts of China has topped 40 degrees Celsius, with Shanghai among the cities suffering the most. Such is the heat and humidity in China that officials have issued the country's first ever level 2 heat alert. Reports say 10 people have died from heat stroke in Shanghai as the city endured its hottest July in well over a century. The Shanghai Meteorological Bureau says the city saw a staggering 24 days last month, with temperatures at or above 35 degrees Celsius. Officials are urging citizens to limit outdoor activity and take extra efforts to protect themselves against the heat. Korea and Azerbaijan's close cultural ties aren't just focused on the trends of the present, but also on discovering the past. In this final report in a series highlighting Korea and Azerbaijan's cultural exchanges, our Song Ji-san tells us how Korean archaeologists recently recovered some historic artifacts in Gabala.
On the outskirts of modern-day Gabala sits the former capital site of Caucasian Albania, which dates back nearly 2,000 years. Excavation of this historic site was put on a halt in 1990, but it was Korean archaeologists who resumed the undertaking some 19 years later under the initiatives of the Korea-Azerbaijan Cultural Exchange. Professor Kim Jong-il of Seoul National University has spent the past 5 years here at the Serbil site, finishing the excavation of this northern wall, a defensive fortress dating back to the 2nd century.
This Serbil site could be used as a very strong evidence, clear evidence, to prove the existence of the Caucasian Albanian countries and very developed urban way of life of the period.
Every finding here, including the buried human remains, have undergone the preservation process thanks to the Korean team's expertise. Up to 30 Korean researchers are dispatched here at any given time, with graduate students working using the project to work on their dissertations. This catacomb is another remarkable site Korean team is currently working on. The catacomb, an underground graveyard, has been preserved in very fair condition, with passageways and chambers remaining almost intact. A representative at Seoul Baku Cultural Exchange says the Koreans have helped to discover and enrich Azerbaijan's history.
Their experience is very important for us, and in this year was many interesting findings as catacombs, burials, and
It hasn't been easy for the Korean archaeologists. They start their days excavating at 7 a.m. every day and live close by. But even after they return to Korea, their fellow scholars will continue with a trek to Gabala to continue what others before them started. Song Ji-sun, Arirang News, Gabala.
Well, let's get an update now on the forecast with our weathercaster Lee Ji-hyun at the Weather Center here at Arirang. Good afternoon, Ji-hyun.
Well, hello guys, but don't we have some sweltering weather to greet the first day of August today?
We sure do, don't we? Not quite as bad as Shanghai, but pretty bad.
Right.
In fact, I calculated, this is what I do in my spare time, I calculated the discomfort index for today using the current temperature and humidity levels.
Wow.
And it's a 5 out of 6, which is interpreted as everyone feels severe stress.
That's why I've been feeling so much stress this morning. Well, I've heard that when the discomfort index gets that high, the number of car accidents actually increases by about 15%. And it's been said that the hot weather puts more stress on vehicle tires.
You know, but unfortunately, we won't have much relief later on as well, because it sounds like it's going to be a very long summer until September. And with monsoon season coming to an end early next week, it will be even hotter in the coming days. Now, today, there's no rain in the forecast in the central region, but expect passing showers in some regions down south in the afternoon, but it should be very spotty. Now, tomorrow, the monsoon front that's been lingering in south coast will be heading up to North Korea again. So most regions will wake up to cloudy skies, and there will be scattered showers in the southern provinces from early in the morning to noon, and the central provinces will have monsoon showers later in the day, and temperature should be similar to today's. And looking ahead this weekend, there's no rain chance on Saturday, but there's a light rain in the forecast on Sunday in Seoul and in the surrounding areas. Now back to today's forecast. Right now things are looking pretty good, but with the scattered clouds throughout the day and sunshine and humidity, it will feel much hotter than the actual numbers. So let's take a closer look at those readings. Daytime highs are slightly higher than yesterday. Seoul and Gwangju will hike up to 32 degrees Celsius, that's 90 degrees Fahrenheit, and Daegu will be soaring up to 34 again, but Busan will stay a bit cooler at 30. Now let's see how other regions are looking. It looks like blazing day for Jeju today. Meanwhile, Dokdo and Mount Kumgang will be staying a bit cooler in mid-20s. Now that's all for Korea, and here's the global forecast for viewers around the world. Chocolate, herbal tea, and milk should calm you down and help relieve stress from the heat today. So why not trying one of those for a snack? Now, that's all for me today, and have a wonderful rest of the day.
Good to see kids having fun outside in the summer-like temperatures we're having. But those are the stories we're following for this hour.
We'll be back tomorrow here at noon Korea time.